All right, I'll be waiting. Let's just wait. Yeah, and Val, I'll try to move the slides without you saying next slide, but if you need to, just say it. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I'll do a kind of pause between, and I've got to flip my page anyways with my notes, so should be good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, it is 11:30 Mountain on the dot, so I think we can get started.
Ready?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Marcella Poloski, and I'm the Business Development Representative here at ERP-One and your host for today's webinar. Before we get into it, I wanted to provide you with a quick background on ERP-One and who we are. ERP-One is an ERP solutions provider. We provide consulting for JDE in technical, application development, and project management. We also provide long-term support via staff augmentation or managed services. Our team has over 20 years of experience working with clients as an extension of their own team, and we pride ourselves on our client-centric approach. Our goal is to help customers get the most value out of their ERP investment. Today's presentation, Data Protection Strategies Using the New Bank Account Masking Feature, is presented by Nick Wilson and Valerie Graves. Nick is ERP-One's Innovation and Technology Lead and has been with ERP-One for 15 years. He specializes in project management, digital transformation, architecture design and review, and upgrade planning and execution. Valerie is a senior business analyst at ERP-One with over 25 years of JD Edwards expertise, specializing in human capital management, finance, and distribution. Her career began as a finance clerk, evolving over time into a seasoned consultant who has supported more than 30 companies and completed over 35 projects. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the comment box and we'll make sure to address them at the end of the presentation. And if by any chance you missed some important points, please note this webinar is being recorded. I'll now pass it on to Nick and Valerie for the presentation. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Marcella, and welcome everybody. As Marcella had mentioned, this is a webinar where we are going to review the Oracle solution that they've implemented for bank account masking, which is a feature that was released in R22 and then enhanced a little bit. And what we're going to do is go over the supporting features of how the bank account masking works quickly. And then Val is going to go over how the bank account solution was implemented and how you can adjust for certain components that you may run into, certain issues that you may run into when implementing. As I mentioned here, this is the agenda where we will review everything. And so we'll start at the objective, the overview. And really, the purpose of this is quite simple, which is good for us here, especially for me. And really, the goal of implementing these features is to mask or prevent access to highly sensitive data. Things like bank accounts or personal and private information. We want some users and reports and integrations to have access to that data, but there's many other scenarios where that data is not pertinent to end users' jobs, and so those users shouldn't see that data, even though it may be displayed to them on the JD system. And so what Oracle has done to fix this problem is really to implement a feature called data protection to achieve data masking. And so data masking really, again, as I mentioned, the benefits are to help mitigate the risk of data breaches, malware attacks, having your unauthorized information or access, going externally to your system, and then having that masking information exposed somehow. It also, there is a compliance factor here as well. The different acronyms, there's many more than the GDPR, but many compliance standards require this PPI or data masking to be present, as well as having some sort of control or auditing capabilities around who can see it and when it was changed. Finally, there is a user experience component to this as well, in terms of the actual access of the data and seeing the data. This feature in data masking prevents and reduces, sorry, the likelihood of human error, getting rid of some of the mistakes potentially that start problems within the system. And so from the data masking perspective, those are the benefits. And we then come to the solution from Oracle, which is called data protection. And simplified, it really is a system or a set of components within E1 that allow you to configure, audit those security changes, and apply masking to different users and roles within the system. And it also exists externally, or sorry, it exists on top of regular security or system administrative tools and utilities. And by that, I mean you don't need an administrator to turn on masking or unmasking to specific users. What you do need is an authorized end user, an authorized person, but it does not need to be an administrator. And so before we move on here, I'd like to do a quick poll. What we wanted to do is introduce this polling capability to just get some basic information from our webinar user base here. And so our poll for today is a question around which E1 release you are on. And so Avinash, if you can put that poll up there, we can vote on that and see the results. I'm not sure I can see the actual poll, but we'll give it a little second here. I did mention it initially that the feature was introduced in release 22. It is part of the rollout there, and if you have upgraded to release 22, you may be familiar with this feature already. Okay. Again, I don't see the actual poll itself here. Oh, here we go. I see. Submit. Got it. Awesome. So many of us, I see the responses here now. I apologize. I see many of us are already on release 24, which is great. A lot of us are on different, the rest of us are on releases earlier. And so this feature or this feature could be the reason why we're on the call today. So let's break down what will go into the data masking setup. Starting at the foundational layer here, really there is some security considerations within E1 that we're working with, and it's good to fit it in context of the overall security structure. So data masking and or data protection here, which is what we're talking about, fits alongside of the security workbench, UDO security, batch security. All of these security components within E1 exist and are configurable, but it is not inside of the security workbench. And
Nick,
so
I'm
this
just going to interrupt you quickly. Sorry, we can't see your screen anymore.
Oh, you cannot. Thank you,
Yeah, sorry. I
Marcella.
think the poll kind of took it over.
I guess that's probably what happened. I apologize.
All good.
Mhm.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was mentioning here, their security considerations are stated on the screen. And the point here is that data masking is another one that we have to then look at and account for. So from this perspective, although it's easier from a end user perspective to apply this masking, it is another security consideration that administrators will need to know that exists. Looking at considerations outside of E1. So the data that we're talking about, personal and private information or bank accounts, does exist in a database. That database, where it's stored, it is not masked. And so when thinking about masking inside of JD Edwards, this is certainly a component that we would want to use, data protection. But if we're trying to assess or ensure that our data is masked at the database level, this is not the solution for that to solve this problem. You have to look at other encryption methods like transparent data encryption or something else to apply database encryption or masking. Similarly, we have some components here where this data or this information, as part of an integration, may be stored in a file system. And again, that data in the files in a flat file form is not protected under this scheme here. And so it is good to understand that. And then finally, again, where this data resides, right, the data that is masked, when it gets to a print queue as well, if that data is printed on a report or an output somewhere, that output or that print queue also needs to be secured, which again, this feature does not support. So with that being said, let's get into a couple slides of how this feature gets built up. It really exists of two components here. The first one is data masking, which came out in apps 9.0, tools 898. And then the second two here, the data protection configuration, as well as some extra business functions, were released with release 22. And so let's go, those two pieces together come up with our new data protection methodology here. So as a quick refresher, a data dictionary item exists, a data dictionary rule exists in 9.0 called LMask. And this LMask is a display rule that you can apply to a data dictionary alias. And when you do this data dictionary task here, all of the fields show up as asterisks when the user logs in and checks out that field. And so this is really the core of what we are implementing, and it has been around for a long time and something that you may have been implemented yourself. Taking that feature and taking it to the next step here, this alias or these aliases can be turned on and off, as I mentioned, with the display rule. In order to implement this in the system, however, you would need to create a custom or a clone of that alias and then apply it to, the apps that you would want to apply to or that you would want to mask. This takes a little bit of work here and obviously would be inconvenient and a lot of customization. But you could also get around, cloning these data dictionary items and making all new ones that are masked by setting a version override. And so when you created a new version for a specific P application, you could override that data dictionary item to make it masked. By doing that, what happens, however, though, is that you have to make UBE versions for all of the apps that you want protected. That's where this data protection feature comes into play now. So within release 24, there is a new app and table called Work with Data Protection Configuration and the associated table. And this is now our repository that will store whether we can see masked data or not. And this repository can be added or amended by non-administrators potentially. And so this is the core of what will control who sees masked data now and who doesn't. Finally, once we configure who can see it and who doesn't, the system, instead of end users creating, instead of developers creating UBE versions for all of the different masking capabilities and requirements, Oracle has provided a UBE that you can enter, you can amend to event rules that will, a business function that you can amend to event rules that will go and check the configuration table, the one that we just looked at. that will say, okay, let's see if the user that's trying to access the application, do they have access in the configuration data protection program? If they do, let's apply the override so that they can so that the data is either masked or not masked. And so rather than having a solution where a lot of different UBE versions are controlling who sees the masking and who doesn't see the masking, we have a system with a table that allows us to mask and unmask on the fly for all applications that have this event rules business function built into it. And so this system, this approach that is available now, is exactly what Oracle has used to implement the bank masking solution. So that is what Val is about to talk to us about here, is how to set exceptions for the bank accounts. But keep in mind that what Oracle has delivered for these bank accounts can also be applied to other data aliases that you may want to mask. Again, Val will walk us through the different bank account solution and how and where it's impacted. But certainly there are other AF fields that you may want to mask. And this solution that I just went over would be the approach or the methodology that you could take, and it would be in line with what Oracle has delivered. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Val here, where she can review specifically the bank account numbers.
Thanks, Nick. So in our example here, we're going to be talking about how the bank mask, the CBank actual piece is in place. CBank is the piece that is in the address book for vendors set up for like EFT payments and that kind of stuff. So all those people out there that are doing electronic funds transfers with their AP solution, this is what we're talking about. And those pieces are all there embedded and work with the applications, UBEs, and work tables based off of that business function. At a high level, it is a general problem that the system is going to act in an expected way, but then all of a sudden, due to stuff being changed, like this one, it's going to do something completely delivered. And to understand this is, with this feature, it is delivered by default to the entire user community in your organization. So it starts off with, it is masked on mass, and this is how you're going to be opening it up. As we all know, JDE is integrated, and we need to know that that is the case because this is how you define what the issue is that you're looking for, how to scope out the problem. And if you're adopting this latest release with all the ESUs and features turned on by default, finance, HCM, localizations, order management, and all of the pieces that you see here are all impacted by this masking feature. Now we need to talk about how do we configure for the exceptions. Like we said, it is understood that in the applications, the batch versions and the work processes that are happening, all these fields that we're talking about, CBank for this example, are going to be masked. So understanding where all of these aliases exist as the data items that are set to be L-masked by default, you need to define that. Included in the base, they have given you the listing of which fields are going to be out there. And it's just from the data dictionary items. Here's all the ones that are listed for masking with the LMask feature. So you can see the CB NK is there. If you're looking at payroll, FOA number sign, and then 2 through 8 are the payroll bank account ones. So all of those come in by default with that LMask set. And we want to talk about how we configure that. Let's talk about the base piece. Now for what applications are set in the base default provided. They're delivering a list of applications. I know that's super tiny, but if you were talking about our example, P0030A is where the CBank sits. So that is the application. This is the list that you would be able to go in and add in any additional custom UBEs or applications that you're also wanting to configure in addition to the ones that are there. Custom objects need to be inserted into the UDCs, so you have to understand that piece to be able to let them be set up as the exception for the data to be seen. So let's talk about how this UDC gets created. Like any other UDC, you would just go in and do an add like you would in any other UDC field. It is the product code 00PI for program ID, and you would add anything additional needed in there that you can also get added custom ones that you would have defined out of your CNC running X reference, and you can go look at the alias to see what applications, UBEs, and what tables that they do exist in. When we're looking at dealing with the data protection and working with creating what needs to be done to set up for the exceptions in the P0040 application, that's this application, you need to define who, what, where. So that's what you're dealing with this situation. The very first piece, oh, sorry, can you go back? Nick,
Yes.
thank you. The very first piece is the configuration record type. This is defining at what level you want to do that at. Is it going to be for all users? Is it going to be for a specific role or an ID? Or is it going to be set up for AB all? So kind of like Star Public. You can do all of that. The second piece, sorry, I'm still on that one, Nick, thank you. The second piece is you're defining what program ID it's for. And then the final piece is whether it's going to be view or update. So all four of those pieces get defined based on what record type you're creating. Now we can flip. Thank you. So we just wanted to demonstrate what it looks like, no configuration, nothing added into the data protection. It automatically comes out when you're going into a supplier bank account information where it stars out the beginning and the last four fields are visible, and that is defined in that data dictionary piece that we saw that Nick showed us originally. So this means that by default, if nothing is configured in your data protection and you haven't defined anything in P0040 for specific users, for specific roles, or AB all, that it is going to be start out, and this will impact all your users, obviously, processes, as well as any integrations. So when you're looking at adding in a role piece, that would be a record type 2. That is where you would then define either a user role or a user ID, defining out which program ID and what kind of access you want for them, whether that's view or update. So we've set this one particularly as view. And I think that screenshot's been mirrored upside down, but they can see the view in there. And the bank account, although grayed out, which is the field kind of in the middle there, right there, it's gray, so they cannot update it, but they do have access to it, the view of the full amount.
Mhm.
If we look at the next one, this one has been set up as well for the record type 2 for the sysadmin, and that's who's signed in there. We have this now set up with update, and you can see that that is no longer grayed out in that second field, and they have access to view it as well as update it. But this also is dependent on security. So if they do not have the security to have access to this, that will not trump that setup. So if they don't have that access in that application, they would obviously not have that access. So let's talk about it with the security in place. There is the ability to have column security in place as well. And this is an example that we have where column security is set up on our sysadmin. And even though we have it with view or update for them, that will not take precedent over your security workbench that is allowing only view access to it. Security workbench will always win in the end. Let's now look at it where it is restricted. You can now see with the column security in place that view is not even an option. Even if we have view or update on the data protection, this user doesn't even see that field in that application at all. So they cannot see the C, B, and K like they could in the previous screenshots. So the example that we've been talking about obviously is focused on that AP or address book bank accounts. As a part of the default setup, it's being brought in with this new feature. It is to bring about prevention of access to the highly sensitive banking information, and it's in general supposed to be for compliance purposes. And if you implement and configure the data protection program properly for your users, you're going to see a added value of them not having to deal with the data breaches or the security risks that are out there and deal with the compliance to all of these pieces. Back to you, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you, Val. Right on time. So, in summary, we've gone over the supporting features, how you could potentially use them with your own solutions, as well as how Oracle has delivered all of the updated apps and UBEs with that business function in the event rules that will query the data protection. And so here are some of the considerations that we have come across when implementing this at customers. We certainly need to secure our data protection program so that we have no unauthorized access for people to then mask and unmask the sensitive information. When troubleshooting or implementing, understanding, although certainly the goal is to have non-administrators applying masking or unmasking, or at least the ability for that. But the administrators will need to, or sysadministrators will need to understand how it fits and whether there's some impacts with column security. That is certainly one that does throw a wrench in the troubleshooting when you're trying to understand why can I not see the data even though data protection is unmasked. We spoke about check printing. And so this is an area that Oracle has made an exception to the data protection program, and that when you're printing checks, regardless of who is printing them, the bank numbers will not be masked. And this is to prevent the user who runs the check run, sometimes does not even have access to the check printer, but will have access to JD Edwards and be the one operating it. And so they don't need to see the bank numbers, but they need to be able to print the checks without them being masked. And so there isn't a problem with applying data protection, and your checks will still print fine. I mentioned about the securing the sensitive data in tables using TDE. And again, that this solution is really just at the E1 level, not at the database level. And finally, we need to, sorry, let me back up. When we store the data, right? So if we have an integration with another system that will utilize a flat file or something similar to a flat file or an XML file, that data will be stored unmasked in those files. And so when looking at applying, masking, we'll need to come up with another solution to secure this data when doing integrations or encrypting of the sensitive data files. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining, and I'll open it up for any comments or questions that anyone may have.
Yeah, so we are pretty much at time, but we did have a quick question come through the comments. It was, if we don't want to implement bank account masking, is that an option?
That is a great question. And so certainly it is an option. And Val mentioned when enabling data protection, initially, what instead of having a row in that data protection app per user, you can apply unmasked at the star public role, which is that AB all. And so what you can do is if you don't want data masking whatsoever, you can insert one record into that application that says unmask for all users. And once you do that, every user in the system will see the bank account data.
It'll be by program ID though. So it'll be each role, each item for each program ID for where that CBank is being held. But
That's right.
yes,
With
that's
the
exactly right. With the
with the
ABL.
list.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And great question as well. One that we've run across.
We did have one more come through, so we can address it quickly if anybody has to jump. Again, this is being recorded, so you will get the recording. But they said, is it possible to use masking functionality for fields other than bank accounts, such as, for example, tax ID in F0101?
So that's your address book, and SSN is in the default list. So yes, that already comes by default with this functionality. We just focused on the CBank, but SSN is also in there.
But to further, answer the question, if there are other aliases, you can apply them to those fields. But what we'll need to do is use the same process of understanding where those aliases are being used, which programs and versions, and it will require that some customization of those apps be put into place. Now, that customization is minor because you need to insert that one event rule into the code, but that will need to happen. And that would be the same process for your pure custom apps as well. If you want to protect the bank account on pure custom apps, you need to do that similar customization where you need to check for the data protection security level before opening the app. And again, that's done in the event rules with the developer.
Okay, well, that's time to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us today. In case you did miss anything, I will be sending out an email to all the attendees with a recording of the webinar, along with a post-webinar survey. Please note anyone who completes our survey is going to receive a Starbucks gift card to show our appreciation. And in the meantime, please keep an eye out for our next upcoming webinar on orchestrations. And please make sure to check us out on LinkedIn. We're always sharing helpful tips and blog posts. Thank you so much and have a great day.